que no ves nada.
Ahora sí que no veo nada. Bueno, buenas tardes. Muchas gracias.
Good evening. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Hello, Richard, and welcome. It's a pleasure to have a chat with you again. 5 years, precisely 5 years after the Eurocon 2016. Precisely on the day.
La entrevista será en inglés, pero Richard habla castellano y está deseando que le hagáis preguntas. Y vamos a dejar un ratito, como mínimo unos 15 minutitos al final, para que le hagáis preguntas que seguro que tenéis muchas ganas de hacerles. Bueno, a diferencia de las otras dos presentaciones anteriores, yo sí que os voy a leer una introducción sobre Richard para que sepáis perfectamente quién es. Seguramente ya lo sabéis, pero igual no con el detalle que os voy a dar. Richard Morgan, o Richard K. Morgan, como también se le conoce, nació en 1965 y se crió, como explica en la estupendísima presentación autobiográfica de su web, en una zona semirural de Norfolk, cerca de donde vive ahora con su esposa española, Virginia, y su hijo. Richard es licenciado en Historia por Cambridge, pero se dedicó profesionalmente durante muchos años a la enseñanza del inglés para extranjeros en países como Turquía, España mismo y Escocia. Y lo retiró de esta profesión la publicación de su primera novela en la trilogía sobre Takeshi Kovacs, Altered Carbon, de 2002, de la que tenéis aquí la traducción.
So the Altered Carbon trilogy, winner of the Philip K. Dick Award, followed by Walking Angels, and it was translated twice. This first novel, Altered Carbon, and also Broken Angels is also translated and published, and the third one will be published by Christmas. We still don't know the title in Spanish. Altered Carbon was, as you know, adapted by Netflix. We will ask him about him with 2 seasons. He also has written Market Forces, which was also translated, Black Man, winner of the Odyssey Clack Award, not translated, and we also have in Spanish the fantasy trilogy, A Land Fit for Heroes, with The Still Remains, The Cold Commands, and The Dark Defiles. Richard is now working on his new novel, which is the sequel for Finnair, his most recent novel. He has also written scripts for graphic novels, video games such as Crisis Ghost, Syndicate, Land Fit for Heroes, and he tells me he's now busy working on yet another video game. So that's Richard.
You again.
It's great to be back.
Here's some of my questions, and I hope we'll have more from the audience. Right, so when you first imagined yourself as a professional writer, did you already know that you wanted to write science fiction and fantasy?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I grew up reading the genre, and from a very, very early age, like I think most people do, actually. It's an interesting thing. I think certainly my generation, most of us grew up reading or watching some kind of science fiction, you know, or fantasy. I mean, the C.S. Lewis stories, the Narnia stories. I think Tolkien, of course, Lord of the Rings was big when I was at school, when I was like 11 or 12. There was a reissue of the books and everybody was reading them. Doctor Who was very big when I was a kid as well, and there were novelizations of Doctor Who as well. There was another show called Space 1999, which the real science fiction devotees will know, but it's less common. But again, this stuff was around, and and also I think it was the times, like 60s and 70s, were actually very optimistic times, and there was a vision of the future which was pretty unrealistic, to be honest, in that it was full of protein pills and everybody wearing white. But it was a positive vision. It was a vision that things were going to get better and the future was going to be great. And I think that all of that must have had an impact. And I think what's interesting is, again, that it's not so much me getting into science fiction. It's the point at which a lot of people clearly stopped being interested in it and went off into other forms of literature, possibly more serious forms of literature. And that just never happened to me. You know, I think in my entertainment, what I like above all is visceral impact. I'm looking for the emotion, I'm looking for the guts of the story, I'm looking for a sense of tension, desperation, an emotional response. And it's easier to find that stuff, I think, generally speaking, in in genres, not necessarily just science fiction, but science fiction is one of them. Science fiction, fantasy, crime. These are areas that cater very specifically to that. And I think, especially in the era that I was growing up, the 70s and then the 80s, literary fiction was kind of not very interested in that. And if anything, it seemed to be very, to use the most appropriate, I guess, up its own arse, in that it was what we in English what in Spanish you call cultureta fiction, and I think I would translate that as chin stroking fiction, which is fiction, whether it be on the screen or in a book, that you, instead of feeling, you go, that's very clever.
That's clever. Yeah.
That's interesting. And the literary fiction was full of that at the time, and I found it quite hard to get into literary fiction as a teenager and then as a young man, because for me it felt cold, it felt chilly. There didn't seem to be much there for me. Whereas genre fiction, whether it be the crime fiction genre or science fiction or fantasy, it was full of, the gut. There was emotion, there was blood, there was violence, there was all this stuff, and that for me that's the pulse of fiction. So maybe that's why I stayed. I don't know. You could draw a parallel, I guess, actually here. I'm going to try to anyway. In that, I remember when I was about 13. I went on a German exchange to the Ahr Valley, not far from the Ruhrgebiet in Germany. And I remember it was a period of time when all of us, teenage boys that we were, 12, 13, 14 years old, everyone was learning to drink beer. And of course, when you're 13, beer tastes horrible. So everybody was ordering beers in these German bars where they were very lax about how old you had to be to drink beer. Germans are very proud of their beer, and they're quite happy to serve it to you. So we would all order beers and then go, that's good beer. Except for me, and I was horribly mature when I was 13, and so I tried it once and I went, that's fucking horrible, and went back to drinking Coca-Cola. And so I never developed the taste for beer, interestingly enough, because I was too honest about my reaction to it. And maybe in a way that's what happened with the literature as well. The age when we all started to say, I really should go away and read some chin-stroking literature. Right? It's about time I read Nabokov. And I'm like, fuck that, this is boring. And maybe I stuck with the genre because, again, it was like, no, this tastes horrible. I want something that has a nice taste, that I can get, a sense of nourishment from. And literary fiction didn't seem to offer that.
For you. Okay, I was thinking, how do we explain what you do as a novelist to someone who's never read your work? And I was thinking, a typical Morgan novel has a central male hero inverted commas, who's usually an angry man or a monstrous man, or both an angry, monstrous man, right? And things happen to him so that he needs to react. He finds himself surrounded by plenty of action and usually plenty of violence. Is this it, or is there something else to?
No, that's about it.
Would this be the common denominator? This is what you
Damn, you've summarised that really well, actually. I might stop writing now.
Now I've made you self-conscious.
Somebody has got me. I think what drives most of my fiction is rage. Rage at the human condition, rage at how stupid humans are, how callous we are, how little we seem to care about the feelings and the lives of others, how tribal we are. That's what I'm particularly angry about at the moment. And so what I need in these situations is a character who is unaligned. That's to say, he doesn't really have a tribe. He doesn't really have a place of benefit to stand. And because he doesn't have that place of benefit to stand, he can excoriate the everything about this world, and because he's I also don't want this guy to get squashed, which is what would happen to an ordinary person in that situation. And in fact, in literary fiction, this very often happens. Literary stories are very often the story of a sensitive soul who is flattened and destroyed by life. And I didn't want that. I wanted a character who would be able to stand all of this and take some kind of vengeance for it. and not be too badly affected. Now that's a tough order. You have to be a pretty tough character to be able to do that. So I guess what I went for was an inner core of compassion that is pretty unconditional. It's just a sense of how much suffering there is in the world and how much suffering there is in the human condition. And that's at the core. And then armoring this is a survivability and a sense of having seen so much of this that you're able to sort of endure it and function. And to some extent do the damage that needs to be done to the perpetrators of this kind of thing. And I think that's where that's where I tend to want to stand. Now, you could, and there are novelists who have made a lot of money from this. You could take a character who has all of that, but is morally upright and pure, and is in essence what Hollywood would understand as a hero. You could write. You could call him something like Jack Reacher, for example. Yeah. And you could make a lot of money with that character because people love the idea of a hero who's heroic and I'm too honest for that. I know that these qualities don't tend to dwell in men who are well behaved and socially aware and working for the greater good. Generally speaking, that's not where you find these traits. So in order to remain true to what I see in the world and true, I suppose, to myself, these characters have to be dysfunctional. They're not safe. And for me, looking back through the kind of the myth base and the heritage of the hero myth, this has always been the case. This is not something new. If you look back at the Norse myths, or even further back at the Greek and Roman myths, heroes in those traditions are not necessarily likable human beings. They're not necessarily good characters. What they are is strong and good at surviving. And they very often they provide leadership models because of that. But there's not really much attempt to kind of say that they're actually great guys. So it's not that I'm inventing something new here. I think what I'm doing is I'm taking the hero myth back to where it belongs. And I'm not the first to do it either. I mean, this is, my influences, if I were to list my influences, it's Sergei Leone's spaghetti westerns are a very early influence on me. I saw them when I was far too young to be watching them, really. And again, yes, there is that sense of that these are bad men, but it takes bad men to survive in this environment and to carry the story through. So I think that's the issue. It's about telling a visceral story, a story that has emotional impact, that kind of excoriates the stupidity at the heart of the human condition and the callousness and the cruelty, but does it in an honest way, rather than in a way of saying, hey, don't worry, because there's this wonderful white knight hero who's going to come and fix the situation. Because I don't believe that these situations can be fixed, or at least not easily fixed.
Okay. So when you think of your novels and think of your work as a writer, do you see yourself mainly as an entertainer, or do you think that you have a message to give, and that is the message precisely?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's a difficult question. It's funny because I was listening to Carmen Maria Machado earlier, where she was saying that she feels that we are taking our entertainment too literally. We seem unable to pass it effectively. We seem unable to understand it for what it is. And I think there's truth in that. And one of the things that often comes up is this idea of, what are writers for? Because we do quite well out of this, and and I often think, well, maybe I should have become a doctor, because there's a Bob Dylan song where one of the lines goes, maybe I should have been a doctor, I might have saved some lives that have been lost. And you do wonder sometimes, you think, well, I'm writing these stories and making a living from it, and does that serve a purpose? Is it useful? But I think that's the wrong way to approach it, because it's rather like saying, what are trees for? Anyone got an answer for that? What are trees for? There isn't really, is there? I mean, they just grow. That's what they do. They do things. I mean, they function in the sense that they recycle carbon dioxide and they put out oxygen, and and they're part of an environmental system. And they and you can do things with them. You think, well, what are trees for? Well, so we can cut them down and make things out of wood. But it's not really what they're for. That's a use we found for them. And I kind of feel in the same way that there is no answer to the question, what are trees for? I think it's the same way the question, what are writers for? There isn't really an answer. It's like, well, we just exist. Here we are growing, and and we function, and we have function. We entertain people. We externalize stuff that maybe very often doesn't get taken out of people's heads and looked at in any detail. But I'm not sure that any of that is a sort of intended thing. When I write to entertain myself, or possibly to purge myself. I don't know. Maybe it's they say that Ian Fleming was advised to write the James Bond novels by his doctor, who said that he needed some kind of a therapy to to get out some of what was in his head, and I can certainly understand that, because I think a lot of the Kovacs novels came out of me having chosen the wrong profession, basically. I mean, I was an English language teacher, which is an extremely hippie profession. It's full of touchy-feely niceness. And some of the people you meet in that profession, some of the people you have to teach, turn out to be complete fuckers. And maybe Kovacs, in fact, I do think Kovacs was kind of the part of me that would have loved to have, instead of going, yes, that's very interesting, but perhaps we could maybe be a little bit less sexist about it. And, the part of me who would just instead grab the guy by the throat and throw him out of the window, which, you can't do in English language teaching. Well, you can do it once, but so yes, I mean, maybe there's something purgative there as well. I'm getting something out of me that's, a rage that's inside me. But like I said, I don't think of this as being designed. It's something I do. I've been doing it for a long time now. Not really sure why I do it. I certainly don't know how I do it. I mean, every novel is a fresh terror for me, because I'm like, God, how do I do this again? But I don't know that it's for anything. I'm kind of happy growing in the forest and, doing a certain amount of emotional recycling of elements.
And being your kind of tree.
But not sure that there's a purpose to it.
Okay. Right, so you have sort of anticipated my next question. For 14 years you were a teacher.
Yeah.
Not simply a teacher, but really involved in the profession of teaching English to foreign students, okay? And basically you retired not because Altered Carbon sold a lot of your first novel, actually, but because correct me if I'm wrong, but because producer Joel Silver bought an option on your novel, right?
Yes.
And that enabled you to retire from teaching.
Yeah.
Was that safe? Were you scared at any moment that you would be unable to survive on your writing?
Not scared, no, because... well, first of all, by the time that happened to me, I had quite a good job. I was working at a university in Glasgow, and it wasn't what I wanted to do, but it was quite well paid. The conditions were good. I wasn't desperate to escape from it.
Okay.
That was the first thing. The second thing was that I didn't have any dependents. I mean, I was married. Well, I had a girlfriend at the time, a long-term girlfriend, but she was independent. She had a job. So I didn't have any children. So I kind of felt that I didn't have to worry about anything. So there was no fear of that, of failing to provide for dependents or loved ones. So yeah, it was funny, because in the end it was my boss who actually pushed me off the cliff, because I realised that I could, on the money that the Warner Brothers option gave me, I could quit my job and write full time. And I kind of hummed and hawed, and I'm like, I don't know. And my boss actually said to me, she said, well, look, your whole life, this is what you've wanted to do, isn't it? And I'm like, yeah, I said, it is really. Yeah. She said, so get the fuck out of here. Just go, man. Go do it. She said, if things go bad, I can always hire you back,
Okay.
So, but no, there was no fear back then, because, like I said, I wasn't a parent. And we didn't really have any big financial commitments or anything like that. And I think as long as you are fancy free, then it's not such a big step. And the other thing I have to say is it was a lot of money. I mean, it was about 5 times the highest salary I'd ever earned in my life for a year. So I kind of thought, well, even if things don't work out, I've still got several years before I have to worry. So no, there wasn't really any fear. It was a little bit of incredulousness, I think, incredulity, where I'm like, wow, can I really do this? I guess I can. But no, now if this had happened to me now with a child in school and a mortgage on a house and all those things, yeah, it would be fucking terrifying.
Yeah, it's sure. Okay, so the movie was never made.
Nope.
But then producer later Kalogridis bought from Silver the rights to the adaptation in 2008, if I've got this right. And finally, as we all know, the Netflix adaptation was finally released in 2018. How were you involved in the making of the series, and are you generally happy with the results?
Yeah, I mean, the involvement was quite deep, but it was always conditional. So that's to say that Lita Kalogridis, the producer of the show, was a big fan of the books, and from the very start, she was even before we got the Netflix deal, she was saying to me, she said, "I'm a huge fan of. I really want to do the book justice." And so right from the start, she was saying to me, "I want, how much do you want to be involved? Do you want to come out and see us? Do you want to meet the writers' room? I can send you scripts." She did. She sent me scripts. She sent me casting reels from the various actors they were considering. She was really great about that, and she always listened to me, but she didn't always do what I wanted, and that was the conditional aspect of it, was that I would say something. I would say, "I don't like this. I think you should do this instead." And sometimes she'd go, "Yeah, you know what? I think you're right. Okay, we'll change that." And then other times I would say, "I don't like this. I think you should do this," and she'd go, "Yeah, okay. Well, thank you for that, Richard." Anyway, and she would just go and do it anyway. So I was, I say, a lot of involvement, but very conditional, which is great because I had no responsibility for the show. It was what Kalogridis and Skydance and Netflix made of it. And I loved it. I mean, it's different than the book. It's not my Altered Carbon. It's very much Kalogridis' Altered Carbon. But I really, really loved the first season. It's very hard to describe how ecstatic I was watching the first sort of 2-3 episodes of the show when I was shown, because they gave me access to it early. Because I don't know if anyone's seen it. Has anyone seen it?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Good. I'm glad. The production values were very, very, very high. I mean, they spent a ton of money on it. And it doesn't look like TV at all. I mean, it looks like a movie. It's a 10-hour movie. It's got the density and the attention to detail, and it's really a brilliant piece of work.
But so does it look the way you imagined it?
Yeah, pretty much. Yes.
Yes.
I mean, it's interesting. One of the criticisms that got leveled at the show when it came out was, it's a lot like Blade Runner. And for me, that wasn't a criticism, because it's like, yeah, too fucking right, it's like Blade Runner. Blade Runner was in my head the whole time I was writing this book. Blade Runner was one of the major inspirations for me when I started writing. So the fact it looks like Blade Runner is bang spot on with what I wanted. So yeah, most of the show looks exactly the way I envisaged it. I'd say the only bits that don't really are the when Kovacs joins the revolutionaries and he's kind of hanging out in this jungle, in this sort of rainforest type area, which is somewhere in British Columbia, because I was shooting in Canada at the time. That I never imagined that. But again, I thought that was a very interesting differential, because I wrote about the Quellist Revolution in the books. Yeah. And for me, as a European, when I talk about revolution, I think Budapest 1956, Czech Republic in Prague in 1968. I think, fighting in the streets of cities, bullet scarring on the architecture, tanks, and it's a very urban vision for me, because all the revolutions that I've done a lot of studying of have taken place in the 20th century and have been involved in urban environments almost always. Kalogridis is American. And for her, you say the word revolution, and it's the American Revolution. The American Revolution happened at a time when urban space didn't really exist. There weren't big cities back then. And the revolution was fought mostly in the countryside. The battles were fought on hills, in woods, things like that. So when she hears revolutionary, she's thinking of Thomas Jefferson, of George Washington, of the redcoats fighting against the American irregulars, and this is very much a rural vision, and so obviously that's what happened there with that's why that's in there, because for her that's that's what was summoned up by that language. Whereas obviously for me it was completely different. So that was different. But apart from that, I would say it's like 90% what I had in my head.
Even the second season?
No. No, the second season is very much its own beast, and it's fine. I mean, it was. I see what they were trying to do, but by this time, the first season departs a little bit from the book, and the point is that trajectory wasn't massively different in the first season. But the point was the angle they'd taken made it increasingly the case. Mm-hmm. And so by the time you get to the second season, they are so far off the map of the books that there's very little left. Mm-hmm. And so although there are a lot of cool things from the second and third novel that are in the second season, none of it really has the tone. And the tone of the second season is completely different to the first season. It's one of the reasons why people didn't like it. I mean, It's fascinating because season one, the public really loved it. I mean, you go on Metacritic and the reviews are up in the 80s. But you look at the critical reviews, and the critical reviews are a lot more mixed. They didn't. It's a bit sexist. There's a lot of naked female flesh, and it's very violent. And we didn't. There was a lot of kind of what's the word? Puritanical resistance amongst the critical community. So the second season addressed that, and the critics loved it. So the critic you get on Metacritic, the critical response is way up in the 80s now because they were given what they asked for. Mm-hmm. It was toned down. It was decaffeinated, as my Spanish publisher likes to say. And so the critics loved it, but everybody else hated it. And they're like, so it's got like 4 out of 10 from most of the viewers on Metacritic. It's fine, it's still well done. The actors are very, very good. There's a lot to like about it. Visually, some of it's very beautiful. Mm-hmm. But fundamentally, it's not anything to do with me. That's how I felt about it.
Okay, so then here's my next question. Tell me about the impact of the series on your public image, your sales, and the options on your other novels. Are there more projects to have more adaptations based on your books?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's the crazy thing about success, is that you spend years trying to have success and failing. And then when you have some success, suddenly everybody looks at you and they go, hey, he's successful. We better give him some stuff. Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting because I was here, I don't know if everyone was here for what's his name? I've forgotten his name, Durton.
Stuart
Durton, the first author who was on today. And he was explaining how he spent years trying to get through the door of publication. Yes. And as soon as he got through the door, 100 other doors opened up for all sorts of other possibilities.
You had the same impression?
That's exactly my experience. As soon as I got published, then there was the movie deal, then there was Marvel came looking for me saying, would you like to write some Black Widow comics? Mm-hmm. I had offers of work in the games industry. There was a sort of, do you want to get involved in trying to produce a TV show of this and that? So it's one of those very unfair things where, success eludes you until you get it, and then when you get it, you're suddenly given far more than you can handle.
But surely this is now another level of success, right? So things must be happening now.
Yeah. Yes,
it was
very much the same thing. I mean, the first payoff was the publication and the movie deal, and that sort of carried me. And then when the show came out, it was like another door that suddenly got kicked open, and again, massive success beyond that, in the sense that suddenly I'm being asked to do this, that, and the other. All my other books are getting picked up for option. There's constant interest in. Oh, have you got anything else? Have you written anything?
So we're going to see more series based on your novels.
Well,
soon?
I hope so. I hope so. We'll see how it goes. I mean, I'm trying to think. I think more or less everything else I've written is under some kind of option at the moment.
Everything.
The Lamp for Heroes fantasy trilogy. There's a very high, a guy I really rate very highly. He's a Oscar-nominated short film maker, and he's taken it on, and it's a passion project for him. And he is trying to find the finance and the people to get it made. Very hard to do, though, because it's difficult material. And then there's an option out now on Black Man 13. There's a Canadian company who are trying to do something with that. I've got a lot of interest in Market Forces, a couple of Hollywood producers who want to try and get that made.
As a film, not as a series.
They're open to possibilities. I mean, they see it as a film, but I think they would do TV as well. It's so yeah, more or less everything is. And the altered carbon option continues to be with Skydance. Whether they'll choose to do anything else with it, that remains to be seen.
But does this mean that readers recognize your name? That is to say, if you tell people, I'm the author of Altered Carbon, do they react to you and say, hey, that's a TV series, that's not a novel. Who are you? How are you involved?
No, generally speaking, because the conversations don't often go like that. Usually what will happen is they'll say, oh, so you're a writer? And I go, yeah. And they go, what have you written? Anything that I'd know? And I'd say, well, probably not unless you're into science fiction. Are you into science fiction? And they go,
no.
And then you say to them, well, do you watch Netflix? They go, oh, yes. So I said, well, there's this show on Netflix. It's a science fiction show. It's all called Altered Carbon. And they'll go, oh, man, I saw that. That was great. And you're like, you just told me you're not into science fiction. But this is one of the weird things, isn't it? That people will consume science fiction on a screen and without even thinking about it. But as soon as you put it between the covers of a book, then suddenly they're a lot more selective and they're like, it's not really my kind of thing.
Yeah, but then they think that, that print science fiction is like audiovisual science fiction, which creates a lot of confusion, I think. And you miss a lot of very good work, anyway. All right, my next question has to do with your work for video games, right? You told me that you're now involved in the development of a video game with Godzilla games, right?
Yeah, yeah. They came looking for me at the end of last year. Originally they're Ukrainian, but they've also got offices in Frankfurt. And they got in touch, as has happened with almost everything since I was first published, literally just got in touch and said, hey, would you be interested in working with us? Which I say is one of the lovely things about success, that people want to work with you. And they've got an interesting idea for a multiplayer shooter, and they wanted me to come aboard and do some work for them. And I initially did it for a few months, because I thought it would just be a few months. And then one day I woke up and I'm on their website as a development director.
All right.
So I have a real job again. First time in 20 years. It's very odd. It's something that's grown and grown and grown. And I'm doing that at the moment. I'm sort of working around what they want to achieve and how we can fit narrative into that. And that's very exciting. It's nice because it's very collaborative. It's a whole team of people.
And how does this work in comparison to your working on your own for the novels?
Well, it's again, Stuart Durton was saying something about TV and novel writing and how they're a break from each other. And I think that that's very true also for game work. What I love about game work is that it is usually piecework. So they'll come to you and they'll say, okay, we need a character sketch for this. And so you go away and you write up a character, you invent a character, you give them a name, you give a rough idea of what they look like, what their role will be within the game, and so forth. You write that up, it's maybe a page long, you edit it down a couple of times, you take it and you give it to them, you pitch it, and it's like either it'll be accepted or it'll be sent back. But if it's accepted, it's like, bang, job done, on to the next thing. Now that contrasts very pleasantly with writing a novel, where you've got like a year, 2 years, who knows, you're writing away, and you can't see the end, and each day is such a small increment of the whole thing that you're creating, so that it's hard to get satisfaction out of it sometimes. You have good days when you finish a chapter and you're like, wow, I really like how that went down at the end. That's good. I won't have to change that. That's good. But generally speaking, it is a bit of a grind. It's a long haul. Whereas, as I say, in games work very often, it's a very simple thing that they need, and so you sit down, you do it, and it's done to the best of your ability, and you can let it go. And there's a lot to be said for that. It's basically the dopamine drop. It's the idea that you completing a task successfully. And I know this because game psychologists are all about this. We build these games to give you that dopamine hit. And so basically it's task completion. When you complete a task that you've set yourself, you get a little dopamine hit. You can be a long time waiting for your dopamine when you're writing a novel. But in the games industry, you're always getting these little hits of, I did that.
It's more specific then, right?
Yes, very much so. A bit more mechanical, but you know, something has to go.
Okay, in a previous interview, you told me that you don't like planning your novels, that you are the kind of writer that I call a traveler, right? That you go along. But my impression when I read Thin Air, your last novel, is that there was a lot of thinking going into the writing of the novel. There's plenty of detail there. Has your methods changed in any way? Are you planning more, or that was just an accidental impression?
Well, I'm trying. I really am, because the way that I write is very time intensive. And I would love, I know there are writers out there who literally will just bang out a draft, in a matter of 6 or 8 weeks. And then they will either then start going over that draft again, or very often they send it to their editor. This is the thing, I would blush with shame to send an early draft of my work to my editor, because it's not ready yet. But I know there are writers who will do that. They'll bang out the draft, they write the entire thing in very rough form, and then they send it to their editor or their agent if it's not yet been picked up, and literally will go, okay, so that's what I've got. What do you think? And then take the feedback and then go to work on it.
You don't like that?
I don't know. I wouldn't know how to do that, because I wouldn't be able to let it out the door if I felt that it was rough and ready and not very.
So you would never be the kind of writer who is sharing their work as they write on social media and so on. You would never do that.
I don't mind sharing it sometimes with people I trust, but it's not really that. It's just the sense that it won't be a living, breathing whole until it's at least. Don't get me wrong. I will get edited anyway. So, I'll write something to the best of my ability, and I'll polish it, and I'll go over it and edit it, and then I'll send it in. And at that point, yes, the editor will come back and say, I'm sorry, this part isn't clear, or I think you need to take this out because it's just getting in the way of where the narrative's going, or so that feedback will come and I will act upon it. But generally speaking, I want a pretty high gloss before I'm prepared to do that, because most of the time I can see it myself. If I've written it and it's like I can see that this is shaky, it's like, right, well, why are you going to give it to your editor then? Because there's something wrong with it. I'm trying to plan. I'm really trying. I'm like, I need to economize on my time. I need to start planning more carefully. I need to start laying it out. I just can't fucking do it. It just doesn't happen. And the problem is that most of the really cool stuff in my novels these things come when I'm trying to invent my way out of a back alley that I've ended up in. The really good stuff comes when I'm actually at the coalface creating. And so the idea of writing a draft which doesn't have any of that in it, it will be such a boring draft. It will be like, and then he lands on this planet and there are these bad guys and then he chases them and then they chase him and then he kills them. You're like, I can't be bothered to write that now. It's so boring. Whereas for me, the joy of it is actually creating the scenes and the interactions and the characters, and that builds organically over time, and that's what keeps me alive. That's with the book I'm writing at the moment, Gone Machine, the sequel to Thin Air. I have a reasonably clear sense of where the book will end up, but I have no clue how I'm going to get there. I'm about halfway, and I know I've got to be over here by the end, but I have no sense of how I'm going to manage it. No, I have no idea, none at all.
For those of you who've never read a novel by this gentleman, I must say that I always read them twice. First for the plot, and then to enjoy the details that you're telling me come without planning. Okay, for the last novel, believe me, I had the impression that you had done a lot of pre-planning because there was a case there that needed to be solved.
No. I did a lot of inventing. That's the thing. I spent a lot of time inventing the world and the context because I was enjoying that. I really enjoyed the world that I'd built. It was the first time I'd built a science fiction world in over a decade, really. And so I was really enjoying it, but it wasn't planned at all. It was literally. I think I said to you, and I think maybe some of you guys probably saw me interviewed. Previously in Spain, I always feel like the best analogy for what I am as a writer is a dung beetle, escarabajo peletero, because I've got a scene or a character or something, and it's like I've got this little bit of shit, and I'm kind of rolling it around and you know, it gets a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger, and eventually I get to the point where I think, oh well, actually that rolls, I can do something with that. But it's a painstaking process, and it's all about the detail. So you know, the character will go somewhere and it's like, okay, we need to know a little bit about this place, you know, and he's meeting someone. Okay, that guy, does he have history with him? Yeah, let's give him history. Okay, so we need to know a little bit about the history, and so it's, for me, it's like, you know, on stage, when in a theatre, in a theatre, when the character comes on stage and the spotlight will follow him across the stage, and as it follows him, you can see the backdrop behind him, and it's a bit like that. So as the story moves, I light up the backdrop and the world, as it were, and that's a slow, painstaking process, and that's what you're seeing. You're seeing hours and hours and hours of invented detail, but there's no method to the madness, you know.
Okay, I like the madness, I must say. Okay, another thing I like about the madness in your last novel, and I assume the one you're writing now, is that your view of technology seems to have change. I mean, the Mars you portray in Thin Air is a partly failed colony. It is not really a successful colony. And you do something very interesting for someone who came up with the idea of the cortical stack in the Takeshi Kovacs novels, which is that you downplay the idea of bodily modification. And actually, everyone on Mars is wearing something quite similar to the Google glasses. And you told me, again, in a previous interview, that you think that people will not accept so easily interventions on their body, which tend to be painful, complicated, and so on, and that it will be more a matter of, having objects to help us to see reality from another point of view. Could you comment on these two matters, the idea of the failed colony and the limits of bodily modification and so on?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I always... The interesting thing is, William Gibson's early sprawl stories were a big influence on me, and of course, Molly Millions, his super cool, violent female protagonist. She's got these mirror shades that are embedded in her. They rise from her cheekbone and they go up into the orbital bone here, and they are actually fixed in. They're a surgical enhancement. And I remember thinking, okay, I can see someone like that person doing that, but I can't see that being a common thing, because most people are just not going to be up for that. And so it continues to strike me that whenever you hear about some guy who's like, some guy in Silicon Valley who's implanted himself with a device that lets the doors open for him, he just walks through them and the door detects the device in his arm and opens for him. And you're like, yeah, but I don't reckon most of your employees are going to want to do that. It's a bit intrusive. And I think generally we are a little bit wary of especially putting things inside ourselves. I mean, tattooing has become, it's become so common now that it's not worth getting a tattoo because everyone has them. But I think the idea of opening yourself up and putting racks of hardware into your flesh, embedding it in your bones and things like that, that's something I think most people are not going to be comfortable with for a very long time. There'll come a time when they will be. There'll come a time when it will just be a case of, it's painless, it's fast, everybody does it. That will, I think, if we don't, exterminate ourselves as a species, that will arrive. But I don't think it's coming for a very long time. I think that's centuries away. For the time being, I mean, let's face it, if you could have screens on which you can do everything that we can now do on an iPhone. And your two options are, you have the screens surgically implanted into your eyes, so it's like a film that's layered over your eye, or you can get a pair of stylish-looking sunglasses and you just put them on when you need it. What are you going to go for? For me, most normal humans who don't have, issues are going to go, no, give me the glasses. That's fine, because the whole idea of like, well, we're going to go in and we're going to open your eye up and we're going to stick this thing inside, and what if it goes wrong? Oh, it'll probably be all right, Most people are not up for that, There'll always be the body piercing enthusiasts. There'll be the people who are at the cutting edge of this stuff, and those people, yes, they will go for it. In the same way that I've seen some frankly horrifying piercings in my time. I mean, you see someone with it and you're going, oh my God, you did that to yourself? Okay, good for you, man. Whatever lights your fire, So I think we are inherently quite conservative as a species. And that conservatism, I think, is important when you're creating a future world, to understand that it won't be something. This is the mistake that a lot of old science fiction used to make. It's like, okay, there is this technology and everyone has it, you know. And I don't think it's ever going to be that. It will always be, there'll be this technology, and some people have really embraced it and they're really living it wholeheartedly. Some other people use it because they need to, because, you know, in their job, or that, you know, it's part of life now. And there are others who really don't like it. There'll be some who reject it on religious or moral grounds of some sort. There'll be cults who won't partake of the technology. You know, it's going to be variegated. It's going to be a mix of responses. And I think it's very important to try and give that impression when you tell the story, so that when someone's reading your world, they don't think it's like, oh, they have this device and everybody's got one. You know?
So you're not getting, let me see, you're not less enthusiastic about technology, you're just more realistic?
No, I'm not. I mean, I'm very enthusiastic about technology. I mean, technology is who we are. We you know, technology is what separates us from the chimpanzees and the you know, the orangutans. I mean, we are the technological species. Everything we are, we owe to our technology. And when I say technology, I'm not talking only about devices and materials. I'm also talking about things like law. You know, frontiers,
Institutions.
the idea that we can create a system of governance that is invisible. I mean, you can't see it. You can't see the law. You know, you can take a road and you can draw a white line down the middle of it, and you can say, right, everyone will drive that way on this side, and on this side they will drive that way. And as a species, we can do that. You wouldn't be able to do that with chimpanzees. You know, it's that ability to sort of see, you know, manipulate the environment, but also to deal with the environment in a disciplined fashion. That's very much who we are as a species. So you know, it's not just that I'm enthusiastic about technology. I think it's us. It is us. But I think there's a difference between enthusiasm for something and religion, which I think is the problem we've got with a lot of the tech bro culture at the moment, where it's like, because it's new, it's great. And it's like, well, no, most technology comes with some hazards, with some downsides, with some, you know, and I mean, it's Blade Runner, isn't it? You know, it seems you feel our work is not of benefit to the public, Mr. Deckard. So no, replicants are either a benefit or they're a hazard. If they're a benefit, it's not my problem. That's the whole point. All technology has a cutting edge, you know. Kitchen knife has its problems, you know. But I've just become, as I hopefully get better at my craft, I've become increasingly interested in detail. I've become increasingly interested in trying to. It's a trick. I mean, in the end, it's a trick. It's not real. In trying to cast the shadows in such a way as they feel very, very solid indeed and very real, so that when you read the book, you go, absolutely, I 100% believe in this world, because it feels like the way it would be, you know. And I think that, you know, if there's one thing that defines my work, I'd say it's probably that.
Okay. I think it's time now for the preguntas del público.
Sí.
For questions from the audience, go ahead. I can't promise to respond, but yeah, you may ask at least. Hello, can you hear me? My question is, where do you get ideas from for your novels? Do you have like a main idea, or you get inspired by a specific space, or you think up the character or the personality of a character? Well, the answer is yes. Yeah, everything you said. For example, in Altered Carbon, well, it came from different sources. An argument I had with a Buddhist about reincarnation and responsibility about your past acts, and what happens if you do not remember something bad that you did. Would you be liable? Would you be responsible for that? I was also in Vancouver, I believe, and I had rented a car. I was signing, and since I had rented a cheap car, it said, if you damage the car, your liability goes up to $200,000. And I remember myself signing and thinking, well, what if it was a body what you could damage? So these sparks, these pieces, and then I had in mind the idea of someone, of a guy who wakes up and he doesn't know where he is, why he's there, what happened. And of course, that was the first chapter of the novel. And then I had a more violent story about a future gangster in a fight in a motel in a different planet. And it was partially written, but it had nothing to do with altered carbon. So I was writing that the guy wakes up, but I thought, why did he wake up? Oh, wait a second. And that was the prologue to Altered Carbon that came much later than the first chapters. So it's a mix of everything. It's a bit of everything. It's a chaos of inspiration. And I cannot say that the book stemmed from one idea or one scene. No, it comes from my mental chaos, some stuff that I have in my head. And then the dung beetle, you take parts and pieces and you end up with a ball of shit. Is that enough as an answer? Did I answer your question?
Hola.
La idea de la eternidad a través de...
So, the idea of eternity through the exchange of bodies, how did it come to you? Well, body swapping is a very old idea in the sci-fi world. There's even an episode of Star Trek from 1966 or something, and there's a woman who swaps her body with Captain Kirk because women can't command a spaceship because they're women and they can't. So she has to swap her body with a man to do that, and then it turns out she can't, she has the body, but inside she's still a woman and she can't stand the pressure of whatever. Anyway. But it is an attempt at body swapping, which means it is a quite trite and old idea in the sci-fi arena. So I had the need to, talk about a life you've lived, but you don't have the memories from it because you died, and you don't have the last memories from that life. So that's where the cortical stack, the machine, came from. The black box recorder, like the black box recorder of a plane with all your personality stored. And that's where it came from. And then I was thinking about immortality, because of course you can swap from one body to another if you've got the money. As always, the wealthy can't live forever. And it is interesting because when they did the show, Lita Kalogridis and some of the actors too, most of them were Christians, but they had some issues with that. They felt violent, they felt uncomfortable with the idea of not dying and living in one body after the other, and they were asking, would you do that? And I said, of course, I would fucking do it. I mean, do you think I wanted to die? No. It's like I have this appetite for life. I've learned 2.5 languages in my life, and there's thousands of them. So I'd love to learn all of them, or some more at least, but I don't have the time. The books I'm not going to read because there's no time. Countries I'm never going to visit because I don't have the time to do that. Life, I'm 56 now, and I feel like it's been too short. So the possibility of doing it all over again, 56 more years, fuck yeah. I mean, bring it on. So I guess some people have a problem with that, religious problem, like spirituality, like you're not your body. There's something more than that. There's something beyond that, but I don't believe in that. I'm materialistic, and you're not something inside your body. You are your body. That's what I think. So what was your question anyway? Where did the idea come from? Yes. Well, there, what I just said. Do you want me to tell you again, or? So I find somewhat a contradiction about you being a materialistic, because the inventor of the cortical stock is like the opposite. It's like the soul is there, and then you can, transfer it to another body. Yes, but it's not you. It's like a copy of your experiences. It's like, a backup of a hard drive. It's like recording a live show and then watching it again. Yes, but you go to another body. So this cortical stock could be transferred from a man to a woman, right? Yes, but it's still, you're still the same person. Good evening. I haven't read your book. I've watched the show. Well, the book is much better. But I don't know if it's Tesla's president or Amazon's. I mean, they're trying to see how they can tamper with the brain to kind of live forever, and they're probably going to push that idea forward. And also, I wanted to thank you for the character of the hotel owner, barman, because he's great. I'm really sorry because it wasn't my idea, actually. I mean, if he's your favorite character, then you're probably not going to love the book so much because he's not in the book. Yes, but I mean the idea of building him from the other actors. Yes, but about this organic process, in the book, the hotel is the Hendrix Hotel, and the avatar of the hotel is Jimi Hendrix. And I don't have a fucking clue why they. I mean, I have a faint clue that I was writing and I had to give a name to the hotel, so I just said Hendrix Hotel, whatever. And then I said Hendrix, oh, like Jimi Hendrix. And then I thought it would be really cool to have an image of Jimi Hendrix, and anyone who reads the book is going to recognize who he is. But Kovacs doesn't know because it's been centuries from Jimi Hendrix, so he wouldn't have a clue either. So I thought that would be an interesting and cool touch. And then I had to come up with a personality to the hotel, which is not related to Hendrix himself. It looks like Jimi Hendrix, but it's not like Hendrix. He's a psycho, and Hendrix was a pissnik. So it's a mess. If I did it all over again, I would call it Keith Richards Hotel because it would be much more appropriate. But then there was a problem with the rights that the image of Hendrix couldn't be used. Yes, when we talked to the Hendrix Foundation or family, and we told them about the idea and what it was going to be like, they said, not in your dreams. And then we looked for other personalities. We thought about Snoop Dogg. Maybe it could be Snoop Dogg's hotel, and I don't know why it was discarded. Maybe he wasn't available or something. And then I thought we could use Nick Cave as well, because there's a song by Nick Cave, and we could use that there too. And then they came up with this idea of the Raven and Poe as an avatar. and I hated it. I mean, they pitched it to me, and I said, well, and I didn't really like it. And then when I went to Vancouver and saw what they had done with the interiors of the hotel, with this Escher hotel, with ravens all over, and with bulwarks, wakes up, the alarm clock is this huge raven, and then bow and everything. I thought it was great. So it's one of the changes I can say that it's much better than the original, but it's not mine. And I don't want to leave without saying something. Something I loved about the novel is that the villain has this very particular den, which is the Valle de los Caídos, the Valley of the Fallen, Franco's burial place in Spain. Yes, because when I was writing the book, I was living in Madrid, and I had just gone to this Valle de los Caídos, which is quite a thing, and I wanted to have it in the novel. And it's gratuitous. I mean, it's we're in San Francisco. It makes no sense, but I thought we could use a suborbital ship and bring it to Madrid, and then some bars I loved from streets in Madrid, and then back to the story. But it was just because, I mean, it was not meant to mean anything. I just wanted to have it there. And of course, when the TV show was made, and they're on a budget, of course, and they said, let's see if we can film everything in Madrid, in that area, which is, well, that area is maybe a little politically sensitive. And I said, no, forget about it. So one last question. Yes, Richard. It is a pleasure to have you here, and of course, thank you for answering in Spanish. I mean, I'm a little rusty, but I'm trying. Yes, thank you very much. And I would also like to know whether you've written anything fantasy. Is it very different to write fantasy from sci-fi, or have you found differences? Well, it's been quite long since I did it, so I'm not sure because I can't really remember. But generally speaking, I would say no, because when I started writing that still, I knew in my mind I wasn't going to change my style much. So the main character was going to be someone like Kovacs or Karl Marcellis. It was going to be a violent man, soldier in profession, raging against the world, marginalized. So I didn't give it much thought. There were some things, yes, I had to think about the distances, for instance. Like it takes weeks for you to travel from one place to another. So it's not like going from San Francisco to Madrid in a suborbital ship in 3 hours. So you have to change some of the furniture there. But generally speaking, it felt like home for me. It didn't feel much different. The way of writing, the approach. What I find in fantasy literature is that sometimes people try to mimic some kind of oldness, IKEA kind of oldness or antiquity. So it's like they're looking for this old-looking surface of past time. But it's just on the surface. They don't really want that inside. So I wasn't interested in that, so I thought I wouldn't try that. I would do it in a very modern style. I'm not interested in having people speaking in this very complex and old-fashioned way, or their ideas belonging to the 14th century or something like that. I wasn't interested in that. It's fantasy. if I had been interested in that, I would have written a historical novel, but that's a different kind of thing. I was interested in the magic and, the swords, sword fights and battles and so on. And also I wanted to revisit the canon. I felt like doing like Jesus did in the temple, breaking everything. Yes, to such an extent that the main character is homosexual. Yes. But also, sometimes in these fantasies, you have a guy who's gay, but like really gay and showing, and everything except for the sex, and then for the sex is like a macho man. But when you describe the clothes and the way he speaks, everything is like he's like a very sleek and smart, and being gay, the main character, was like obvious for me. Of course he is. And then there's something else. When I started, I wanted to create this marginalized main character, and that's a huge problem I've always had with fantasy stories, when there's this 21st century morality from people living in a medieval, brutal context. So we have this man who's noble blood, coming from a wealthy family. He's not going to be marginal at all because he's got everything he needs. So I was trying to find that marginalized aspect. So then I thought he's gay, and when I was clear he was gay, then it was like holding a live wire, and then it made sense, all of it. He's in the he's marginalized because he can't live in society as he is. He has to hide what he is, and that's why he has this bitterness inside, and he's raging, and he's lost a lover because of the old laws punishing homosexual relationships, and then it all explodes from there. So I'm not sure I'm answering anything. I'm just rumbling, I think, but anyway, it wasn't difficult. From what I remember, it wasn't hard at all to change horses, from fantasy to sci-fi. And I really enjoyed it, especially with the first one. With the second one, I had already had a child, and I couldn't enjoy anything because my eyes were all swollen. So I apologize, but we are overdue. It's time to call it a day. So thank you very much, and you will have Richard signing his books by the gate. Thank you.